very much everyone for joining today. My name's Jo Thompson and I'm a HR recruitment consultant for HR Recruit. Marion is going to be facilitating the boardroom today, and we are talking about presenteeism, the hidden cost of ill health. So I will hand you over to Marion and we can get started. Thanks, Marion.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, nice to meet you. I suddenly realised actually I don't think I ever actually introduced myself when I do these things, do I? But but yeah, my name's Marion. My background's a lot of years in HR in different sectors and different industries. I've been working through my own business for the last 6.5 years now, and I do a lot of things around wellbeing and mental health first aid training. My main program now that's recently developed is one called Unleashing You, which draws on positive psychology, but still very actively involved in all things HR, and research that I did was linked into HR. So hence been working with Jo for a little while now, a couple of years probably on these. So today's topic is presenteeism, which we've been hearing about quite a bit more in recent times. And those of you that come to the boardroom regularly will know it's not so much a teaching session. I'll sort of share some thoughts, some ideas, some information I found, and then encourage discussion amongst you, because you'll all have your own ideas, experience, and expertise that as a group we can benefit from. So what I thought we would just do was, clarify what we mean by presenteeism, think about the impact of it on both the individual and the organisation when people are working when unwell, and then potential strategies to reduce it. So at a simple level, presenteeism is when we continue to work when we're experiencing ill health, and that was the way it was articulated. I mean, we know what we mean by it. But that was the way it was articulated in some fairly recent research by Trinity College in Dublin when they looked into it. And if we look at sickness and its whole, so these were quite recent statistics from ONS, with an estimated 150 best part of million working days lost because of sickness or injury in the UK in 2021, which is equivalent to 4.6 days per worker. And that is relevant because now, I didn't think when I was starting planning this, that I would be searching for images of gorillas, but hey ho, I did. And that was because when you start to look into all the work around presenteeism, it is called the 800-pound gorilla. And I was like, I really don't get this. But actually, what apparently the reason that it came about was because of the huge costs presenteeism inflicts on both employees and organisations. And it's something that it's described as sort of uncontrollable because of its size and its power, hence the analogy with the gorilla. But why that is relevant is because of the size and scale of it. And it is recognized or considered that the cost of presenteeism is considerably higher than the cost of absence. So we've already seen the huge, well, we haven't actually got detailed costs, but we've seen the number of working days and estimated costs of absence. Work Foundation report suggests that presenteeism costs 1.5 times that. So a huge impact. But when we actually start to think about presenteeism, it's actually not that straightforward. It's not as straightforward as whether we are well or ill and whether we choose in that state to be at work or off work. And if we look at what the research that was most recently done found, they looked at 126 employees and they were logging productivity over 12 days during lockdown whilst working from home. So, quite a few variables within that were very unique to the time. However, what they found was that when people were working on a day when they felt unwell, it was draining their mental energy, which they then weren't able to recover the next day. So, we've only got a certain amount of willpower, self-regulation. And if we're putting more of our resources into getting something done when we're not feeling well, it makes total sense that it's going to take us longer to recover. What they found was that one of the main determinants at an individual level of whether people worked when unwell was actually their feeling of how much they'd progressed, the work they'd done in a given day, which makes sense. If our level of work is overwhelming, if we've got tight deadlines, we're more likely to keep going, even if feeling unwell. Whereas if we've got fewer demands, we're more likely to feel able to take time out. So the costs to organisations of presenteeism are potentially increased burnout, because we know if people are working while unwell, we know burnout is continuous unmanaged stress. So people are likely to feel increased stress if they're trying to work when they're not well. We know it's going to impact performance. We know it's going to impact productivity. It's likely to, ability to concentrate, ability to solve problems, accident rates, error rates, all those sorts of things if we're not feeling in our best self. So the recent CIPD survey, I'm just taking this straight from the report, found levels of awareness of presenteeism across organisations has increased. They've seen the changes over recent years. So whether it's just that we're starting to talk the language, because it's certainly not something that would be new, but we are, seeing it being discussed more. One of the things to think about is that there actually are different types of presenteeism, if we think about it. Because on a day, it's not something that will fluctuate over a longer period of time. It can fluctuate on a day. For example, we might wake up with stomachache or a bad headache, and at that point in time, we'll make a decision as to whether we are going to go to work or not. And if we go to work, we are likely to be exhibiting presenteeism when we are feeling unwell, and as the day goes on, we may feel better, and then the presenteeism factor's gone up and removed, or we may not. And likewise, if we've made the decision to stay off because we're feeling unwell, as the day goes on, we may feel better and not have needed to take that time. So there are various determinants, things that are likely to impact the feeling that people need to work if they're unwell. And I think, if we thought about it, it's probably all fairly logical reasons. At a job level, the level of demand we're facing, do we feel we can actually, is the stress of being off work actually going to be greater than the stress of remaining at work? If we're expected to work long hours, what time pressures have we got? So at a job level, it's going to affect our decision about working when unwell. And then at an organisational level, what was found was some of the factors that determined levels of presenteeism was private sector and organisational size. It was higher levels within private sector and larger organisations. We also know something that will impact presenteeism is how other people perceive us taking time off. If people believe it's genuine, or if you feel people are going to be making comments about it, or people may feel they actually have to show up and show that they're actually ill, prove that they are not well enough to be at work before they feel able to actually be off. And then there's other elements that are around long-term chronic health conditions, where people are going to have a level of unwellness at work. For example, persistent back pain or, other underlying health issues that might be impacting them. So you can argue there is always that level of presenteeism. And I put that up deliberately as a potentially controversial comment, because what I was thinking about is, it's not an absolute in terms of whether we are well or ill. There is a continuum with our health, as you know, people will know, certainly if they've been to other things I've done here in terms of our health, well-being, mental health. But the other element of it is we also know for recovery, for some illnesses, actually being in work, having that sense of purpose, routine, validation, particularly for mental illnesses, is actually helpful for recovery. So I think we've got to be mindful that we don't always just say, you know, presenteeism, full stop, is bad. Obviously, I'm not at any level saying if somebody is unwell, they should, you know, that if you are unwell, you should not be at work. But I think we just need to consider that there are different perspectives of when somebody is unwell and when they're actually able to work, or whether they should be off work. So why do we want to address it? I mean, it's about costs to the organisation, it's about the culture that might be influencing it, and it's about, you know, the impact overall of productivity. And, you know, how do we make those decisions? You know, we know on an individual level, we make our decisions as to whether we are well or not. But, you know, what as an organisation, how do we create those cultures that help people make the best decisions from them? So this, again, from the survey, this is what organisations were currently doing to address presenteeism or to discourage it. So, you know, asking people, you know, literally almost having to send people home if they were unwell, which actually we don't want to get to that point. We want people to be able to make, you know, good decisions for their own health. So the better guidance for all employees is relevant. I mean, arguably, you know, some of the changes we've had in working over the last couple of years can help us. You know, people might not feel up to the commute into work, but they might be able to do to be working from home on that particular day. So again, not always an absolute. Training guidance for line managers to spot warning signs, the culture, you know, making it about the outputs, you know, what people produce rather than the measuring the input in terms of hours. Looking at health and wellbeing policies, look again in a minute. Potential causes, you know, why are people feeling the need to work when they're not well? Looking at the policies, you know, viewed as a priority, which may well be within the wider wellbeing strategy, or looking at ways of monitoring presenteeism, which I think is actually a very difficult one to do. It would always be a fairly subjective level of assessment. So that's what they found organisations were doing. So I was thinking about what my perspectives would be as an employer, so as a starting point for your discussions when you go into groups. But I think the culture is the key thing. I mean, doesn't everything come back to culture? How do we create that workplace where people feel genuinely able to make the best decision for them based on their assessment of their health? So, you know, they know they have the permission, they know it's the expectation, and it's allowed, encouraged that if they are not well, then they need to be off work. You know, that's totally separate with other issues, you know, in terms of whether people are not well, you know, are fine, but they're taking time off. So, you know, they're different. We have to always make sure we're not creating policies and cultures to deal with the very small minority. You know, overall, people will try and work. So how do we create that culture where people feel able to take the time? Particularly given the evidence we now have that if people are working, it doesn't make, you know, a business case either. If people are working when they're not feeling well, it will take them longer to recover, therefore longer until they're actually back to working at their full level. So be clear about the expectations. You know, if you are unwell, it is expected that you stay off work. And pressure to work, actually, when feeling unwell, is going to reduce engagement, you know, how people feel about their work, and will affect overall well-being. the culture bit is also, as was mentioned on the previous slide, looking at productivity, looking at outputs, not inputs. And then when we talk about policies, how do we cover that? Are your policies around sickness management or sickness absence management? Because if you're looking at the holistic well-being, illness, sickness part under one thing, then you can include presenteeism. I think it's only more recently it's even been included, but some of that will depend on how your policies are structured. And then the training side of it, what do you need to train managers? Because actually, arguably, a lot of the symptoms, signs and symptoms, you actually can't see, they're not visible. So, how do you encourage managers to have those sorts of conversations with staff? How do you encourage staff to feel able to talk openly about how they're feeling? This covers both physical and mental health. The work talking about the mental health side or mental illness can be a much tougher conversation. But what do managers need to know? What do staff need to understand? So it's about those sensible, open, pragmatic conversations and managers having the confidence to have them. So what I'm going to be inviting you to be doing is we'll put you into groups in a moment and asking you to really share what you're currently doing in your organisation, what you could do in your organisation, and where the challenges are. As I've mentioned a few times, it's not an absolute in terms of whether somebody is well or ill, but it's about how do we manage that situation when we feel people are working when actually it's detrimental to their health in that moment and actually also their recovery. So, Jo, would you like to do your stuff with the breakout rooms? We've got quite a bit, we've got 10 minutes or so, haven't we? What do you want? Discussions. So I'd be really interested to hear the sorts of things that were coming up in your chat just now. Anybody like to share the gist of your conversation?
Just
I think we had an example. Sorry.
Go on.
Where we go. Kelly, go first. Was it Kelly started? Did you start?
I think
was it Katie? Yeah. Katie then. Katie.
I think we had an example of presenteeism in our group. So we had somebody in our group who was actually sick and admitted maybe they shouldn't have been at work today. So I think HR is just as guilty as everybody else. But yeah, we talked about, so we had, I think, a couple of different situations. So we had somebody working in an organisation where people were actually penalised for taking too much sick time. So that was obviously, I don't know, it's not something I've had in, well, any of my organisations. So I'm not sure how common it is, but obviously that's a massive deterrent if you are sick, but you know that you're going to.
When you mean penalised, I mean, obviously you're used to managing absence. What was the way? In what way were people penalised?
I don't actually, I think that was Rosie. I don't know if you've got your mic on, but
right, if you just unmute, Rosie.
So yeah, it is absence management where you hit the triggers, bringing in the bracket factor as well, and it's basically to stop people taking those short-term sicknesses that disrupt production. So manufacturing very heavy on that, heavy-handed aspect, let's say. Yeah.
So I mean, what's your overall thought? I mean, when we're talking about presenteeism, we have also got to balance it with managing absence. And if you have those situations where people are frequently genuinely ill and you have to manage that, and how do you separate that out from the other type of presenteeism, where people are genuinely shouldn't be at work because of illness, but there are pressures feeling that so we had somebody, you said somebody was in your group, I don't know if they're still here, but you know, what were the pressures, what were the thought processes that was leading to the fact they was at work, but they recognised they were unwell?
So like a transparency.
Yeah. Almost sort of having to show that you're ill to then be off. So I've got to show that I'm ill today, so if I'm off tomorrow, people will know it's true. But I would also align it to, as some of you know, the research that I did with HR, and given we're talking with the HR community here, you know, that putting others first before, you know, at the expense of looking after ourselves, is possibly also not unrelated to it. Got to show up, got to be there, people rely on me, and all those things that, you know. So Adrian, I think you were going to say something. You're on mute. Bottom left of your screen, you've got the unmute button. Yeah, no, okay. What else was coming up?
In the group we had, we talked about the balance in sectors where pay is not high, that people are under pressure to come to work because they can't afford not to, versus the competitive pressure of the business of, do you pay full sick pay? Do you not pay full sick pay? What can you do to try and find a middle ground in that without letting your cost base get out of control?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and I mean, that's a very real, I can think of, a particular example that I know, you know, somebody has been in when because they don't get any pay until SSP comes in, they've gone in when they are, you know, really not well enough to, because they can't afford to, exactly as you said. We're not going to solve this, but you realise we're not going to get an answer to presenteeism. But any other thoughts or things that you might do differently in your organisation?
I like the idea of the survey question. Sorry.
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I like that idea of putting something in our employee survey, and I'm going to steal that one. So thank you for sharing it. It'll give us a feel for if this is an issue or not in the organisation.
Sometimes, you know, we might show up for work and actually we're not well and we're not working as well as we might, but we're not really ill enough to be off. And it's those individual judgments, isn't it? And people will draw that line at very different places. And I think that's where we have some of the challenge. So yeah, putting something in the survey to say, have you ever, you know, come to work when you've not felt well enough to is a good one. What other things?
For our organisation, it's definitely got worse over the last couple of years because we've moved, because of COVID, from everyone in the office all the time to most people working from home all the time. And that means that I'll be sometimes, we don't really know when people are sick. So sometimes you're going to meetings and someone will sort of drop me a message and say, sorry, I haven't got my camera on today. I'm actually in bed because I'm really ill, so I don't want to put my camera on. And I'll be messaging back going, should you really be here on this meeting? And even though you don't really know how productive they've been that day or how many meetings they're actually doing or how much work they're doing in between meetings, they're still not resting and recovering. So I think it's enabled that much more, because that person that was in bed, they probably wouldn't have come into the office if that was what we were requiring them to do. So I feel like it's got worse, and it's quite hidden, because you see all these people kind of online on Teams all day, but you don't really know, are they well enough to be at work? Whereas I think when we went into the office, you could clearly see if somebody had come in, and it did still happen, but often their manager would kind of pull them to one side and say, look, you really don't seem well enough to be at work, and they would often then go home. Whereas nobody's really doing that now, because everybody is at home and nobody really kind of sees it. It's not directly in front of them.
And there's also the other challenge, so much illness is not visible. If somebody's got a streaming cold, it's fairly obvious, and actually you don't want them in the office because it will be, spread to everybody else. There also comes that other point, doesn't it, that actually it becomes selfish to go into work if you're just going to be spreading things around. But I thought that the thing that was interesting as the clear finding from that recent research was that when people were working through feeling ill or being ill, it took them longer to recover. So the overall productivity took a lot longer to come back. Whereas if people took a day when they actually needed it, they could come back the next day much more recharged. But that doesn't resolve the finance issues and the other pressures on life. Any other thoughts?
I guess the other part of presenteeism issues is around mental health and mental health.
Yeah.
Having mental health first aiders and a mental health awareness training for managers is a way of picking that up. And you still have that balance with people not being able to afford to not be at work, but at least things which could be perhaps far more divisive and dangerous elements of people coming to work when they shouldn't. If you've got people sort of tuned in to mental health issues, then at least you can pick up some of that.
What was the thoughts? Because actually it was mental illness that I was thinking about, particularly on my slide around, is presenteeism always bad? What was people's thoughts on that?
Well, for myself, you're right. It is not always bad. Sometimes being at work is a great support mechanism because there isn't an alternative. And certainly during lockdown, I think there were mental health issues caused by people not actually meeting other people, just being stuck at home looking at a screen.
And I mean, we know from so many different areas of research and links to anxiety, depression, a range of mental illnesses, having that sense of purpose, having the connections with other people are all conducive to well-being. So if people are experiencing levels of depression, anxiety, actually if we can support them to be at work, then actually that's better than them being off work. And with a lot of other illnesses, lots of cases, if you can support them to be at work, it's much easier to keep them in work than it is to often get them back to work if they get themselves signed off sick because of whatever's going on, because then you have to go through much more complicated procedures. So that would be something else. Okay, well, I'm hoping that has given you, I hope none of you were turning up expecting an instant solution to presenteeism. It's more about having that conversation and the thoughts about, what you might do, what are the influences, and just thinking about it in a wider sense, the different elements that might contribute to it. And just to wrap up, just in terms of the work that I do, if anyone's interested in the new Unleashing You program, which has now got the ILM accreditation, which I'm really pleased about, because that's recognising that behaviours that are conducive to well-being and growth and just feeling better actually also are outcomes in terms of leadership and management behaviours. If you're interested in finding more about that, you've got the bit.ly link there, and there's a QR code that you can scan. And if we're not connected on LinkedIn, it would be very nice to connect with you. So if you've got those, we'll send the slides around afterwards if you wanted that again. But thank you for participating. Thank you for staying with the rooms and contributing to that. And I'll pass back to Jo to wrap up.
Thanks very much, Marion. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining and contributing today. I'll drop you a quick email this afternoon. The next session that we are running is in 2 weeks' time, and it's about inclusive language. So if you do want a copy of the slides from today or a copy of the recording, then pop a comment onto the LinkedIn post. But other than that, thanks very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.